Welcome back to Face the Nation here in New York City. We go now to former Homeland Security Secretary Jeh Johnson, who is here in studio, which is exciting. We've both been tested, I should note, for COVID-19, and we are adhering to social distancing protocols. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's nice to see a face and not just a Zoom screen.
My first live interview in about 8 months, yes.
I think mine too. You told us before on this program that you're relatively optimistic about the security of the upcoming election. But both candidates have both said things that have raised concerns. Joe Biden said at the beginning of this month that he thinks he can win as long as there is no chicanery going on with regard to polling places. President Trump frequently claims fraud. I mean, it's on his Trump campaign website. What should Americans at home be thinking about all this?
I cannot, Margaret, discount the possibility of tension, some unrest on Election Day and in the immediate aftermath. I do know that our FBI, and I have a very high regard for our FBI, has been very focused on this issue. They've set up relationships with state election officials to monitor what we see across various different states. In the event there is trouble, our governors do have the National Guard to preserve the peace. But, Margaret, none of this discussion should discourage people from participating in voting and exercising their right and their responsibility to vote. I'm encouraged that more than 90 million Americans have already cast their ballots, which, if you do the math, is the equivalent of the entire 1996 presidential election. And so I remain optimistic, but we cannot discount the possibility of some trouble or unanticipated events, given the tension that exists out there.
And it's the job of law enforcement to worry about these possibilities. Your former shop, Homeland Security, the cybersecurity unit within it, has set up their largest election security operations center to date. They're going to be briefing the media every few hours on Election Day as well about any interference. How do you assess the security of this election and what the Trump administration has done?
I'm very proud of the fact that my old department, DHS, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, it's a newly created agency, has set up basically a crisis action center on Election Day and has set up relationships with various state election officials. And they're even gone so far as setting up a mechanism to debunk rumors. That is very, very encouraging. I'm concerned, Margaret, about foreign interference. There is, in fact, foreign interference right now in the 2020 election. We know this from our own government. The Iranians have attempted to intimidate Democratic voters. We know that there was a large-scale targeting exercise by the Russian government, but our government does not know exactly what their plan is. So there is, in fact, foreign interference. And so I'm encouraged that DHS is taking this very seriously. They've planned for this. They've had 4 years to plan for this. But there's no complete line of defense against a sophisticated foreign actor. So it's up to the voters to be informed and look past the disinformation that is out there.
Right. What you're talking about is an influence campaign to sort of manipulate thinking or confidence versus going in and changing votes necessarily. But back in 2016, President Obama didn't want a lot of public details about what Russia was doing to try to interfere in that election. He was criticized after the fact for it. The Trump administration has decided to be very public about this, or at least what we know to date. Is that the right approach?
Well, let me disagree with you a little bit there. The Director of National Intelligence and I, on October 7th, 2016, made public what we knew then about what was happening.
But that was very close to the election and weeks after a private company had detected it.
And it was after a very deliberate exercise of declassifying what we knew in a way that did not compromise sources and methods. Also wrestling with the real concern that by going public, we are in fact possibly undermining our democracy.
Do you think that's what's happening now by making this public?
I believe, I believe that our foreign adversaries, I believe that the foreign actors are interested in undermining confidence in our democracy, and that's probably their overall objective here. I am concerned that the president himself has said little to nothing to promote confidence in our democratic process. And so it's really on Americans to have faith in our democratic process. roughly one half the country, and this is a very emotional election, roughly one half the country after next Tuesday is going to be bitterly disappointed. Yes. What I suggest is that it's more important for Americans to think about the long-term preservation of our democracy for themselves, their kids, their grandkids. Preserving our democracy more than any particular political result is what is key here.
Very quickly, you've been reported to be possibly under consideration as a Biden administration cabinet official. Are you interested in serving again, perhaps as Defense Secretary?
It's difficult to look past the next 72 hours. I'm a private citizen. I'm enjoying being a private citizen. I've been in government 4 separate times. If asked to serve again as a patriotic American, I'd have to carefully consider it.
All right. Well, we hope to have you back in that job or as a private citizen. Thank you very much, Secretary. We'll be right back with Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Stay with us. We turn now to former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, and we want to thank you for being here in person. You've been tested, I've been tested, you're at a distance, so hopefully you approve. I haven't seen you in person since mid-March, but things haven't gotten better. In fact, they seem to be getting worse and accelerating in the infection rate this week alone. I mean, the numbers are pretty staggering. The president continues to say we're rounding the corner. That's just not factually accurate.
No, things are getting worse around the country. I think Thanksgiving is really going to be an inflection point. I think December is probably going to be our toughest month. But when you look at what's happening in states right now, you're seeing accelerating spread. We're right at the beginning of what looks like exponential growth in a lot of states, the Midwest, the Great Lakes region, even states like Texas, where you see 6,000 cases, Illinois, 8,000 cases, Florida, 5,000 cases, Wisconsin, 5,000 cases reported Friday. These are very worrisome trends. There are about 23 states right now that are accelerating the spread right now. The positivity rate is above 10% in 15 states. And all the states have an R above 1, which means that they're an expanding epidemic right now. So this is very worrisome as we head into the winter.
Actually, that was acknowledged in a pretty frank interview by Dr. Fauci with the Washington Post that published yesterday. He said neither he nor Dr. Birx from the task force have briefed the president in quite some time. He said that's because the White House didn't like the news. They needed to have a medical message that was essentially consistent with what they were saying. That's pretty flat out saying that medical information and the public's health is being played with for political purposes. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I think the facts are going to overtake any political dialogue very quickly. I think as we get into the next 2 or 3 weeks, it's going to be unmistakable what's happening around the country, and we're going to have to start taking tough steps. I don't think we're going to lock down like Europe is right now, and Europe has a very dense epidemic. There's a very worrisome trend underway in Europe.
Europe didn't think they were going to lock down either, and now they are.
That is true, but I don't think the political support is here for that even at a state level. I think you're going to see targeted mitigation. States take local actions, but we're going to have to start taking more aggressive actions. Probably, my view is the inflection point is going to be Thanksgiving. You're going to see cases build over the next 3 weeks, and December is really going to be the slow month. But I think it's going to be unmistakable what's happening at that point, and we're going to be forced to because the hospital systems are going to become pressed again.
Regardless of what happens in this election, the president is still the president until at least January. If he wins, he owns this through a second term. What does he need to be focused on?
I think he needs to be focused on providing resources to states. They have to get a stimulus passed. They've got to get funding out to states to try to deal with this. I think we need to focus on what we're going to prioritize in terms of trying to keep things open and get things open after we're through this, particularly the schools. We're going to need to support states that have to take that targeted action, try to get compliance with things like masks. So I think the bully pulpit is very important. The national leadership trying to galvanize collective action to try to reduce the spread. You're right. Once we ensue with this over the next 2 months, this is largely going to play out over the next 2 months. By the time a president is re-inaugurated in January, whoever that is, we'll probably be through the most acute phase of this, be coming down the epidemic curve. So this is really going to play out under the president's leadership. What he does over the next 2 months is going to be very important.
So Joe Biden, I know you've looked at his plan. If he wins, he comes in at a period of time in January where we might be on the downward slope here. What needs to happen in that November-January timeframe, regardless of who is president? And are we in a scenario where Congress just none of what you're saying needs to be done gets done. I mean, what does that look like?
Well, look, the Vice President's talked about trying to get testing out more accessible to consumers. I think that's going to be very important. I think at that point we should be trying to prioritize open schools in the late winter or early spring. We're going to have an opportunity to do that.
Close again?
I do not think. I think schools that are open right now might be able to find ways to stay open. I think schools that are closed right now, we have to prioritize trying to get them open. There's a lot of evidence now that the schools can be safely open if they take prudent steps. That should be our #1 priority. I think if Biden were to come in, that should be a focus, trying to get targeted resources, proper PPE to teachers, testing in schools that can't use social distancing, trying to get those resources into schools so schools can open. Also reporting on what the collected experience has been. If you can put out more information about what's worked and what hasn't in terms of keeping schools open, that's going to reassure more districts about opening. That should be a very high priority for this nation. Unfortunately, I don't think it hasn't been. We've been talking about it, but we haven't taken the actions to actually facilitate it.
I want to play a bit of sound for you from something President Trump said at a rally this week.
You know, our doctors get more money if somebody dies from COVID. You know that, right? I mean, our doctors are very smart people. So what they do is they say, I'm sorry, but, you know, everybody dies of COVID.
It sounds like the president is saying there's some financial incentive for doctors to manipulate COVID data. Or
Well,
they're
look,
making money off of it.
I think it's troubling to suggest that doctors are manipulating the data to try to get higher reimbursement. The CARES Act, which the president signed, provides for additional money, about 20% more money for a COVID pneumonia case than a regular pneumonia case. The reason was because it's more expensive to take care of these patients in the hospitals. The hospitals are bleeding money. This was a way to try to get them more resources. But you have to have COVID and you have to have pneumonia, and it has to be documented. Any doctor that would be documenting COVID pneumonia in a case where the patient doesn't have pneumonia, that's fraud. Also, CMS implemented measures to try to encourage hospitals to do more testing inside the hospital. So the testing that doctors are doing in the hospitals is because the government has encouraged them to do that testing. But the only additional money is if you have pneumonia and you have COVID. That's not these patients that they're talking about that happen to come in with another condition and have COVID. There's no additional reimbursement for that.
Who do you think is telling him that?
I think unfortunately, I think there's probably advisors telling him that. I don't think the president derived that on his own.
It is so good to see you in person.
Good to see you.
Stay healthy.
Thank you.
And we will be back in a moment with our CBS News election team, so don't go away. We want to take a closer look now at what to expect on election night with the CBS News team that will bring you our coverage from right here in Times Square. That's Nora O'Donnell, John Dickerson, Gail King, and Ed O'Keefe. It is good to have you all, although the secret is we've all been seeing each other and practicing and practicing and practicing.
Yeah.
But thank you for coming out to tell us and our viewers really, Nora, what to expect. This is such an unusual year, an unusual election. What do you think the viewers need to be watching for Tuesday night?
Well, the massive voter turnout that we have already seen shows that everybody believes that their voice matters, their vote matters. There is a passionate electorate out there on both sides of the aisle. We're sort of focusing on 9 states. We're calling them the notable 9, and we'll put them up on the screen for everybody to take a look at. Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa. Those are states the president has to hold on to. Then he's got to add to there. Maybe it's Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, in order to get to that magic number of 270. And while Joe Biden holds a lead in many of these battleground states, and has consistently in many of them and nationally, I am hearing from both Republican and Democratic sources that that is narrowing. There is an intensity on the Republican side. There is an intensity on President Trump's travel schedule. He's going to 5 states today. He hit 4 places in Pennsylvania yesterday. On Monday, he's going to Scranton, which is, of course, Joe Biden's birthplace. So I'm hearing from people there is a tightening of the gap, and there is an enthusiasm on the Republican part. They think that they can turn out the people on Election Day.
And Ronna McDaniel, the head of the Republican Party, leaning into that idea. I mean, Gail, what do you make of this enthusiasm? I mean, new voters, this early surge?
Well, this is what I think. I think that there's enthusiasm on both sides. Like people have never seen. I think the latest number was 90 million people have already voted early. I voted on Friday. Margaret, I waited in line for 2 hours.
Wow.
For 2 hours. And I'm told that I was one of the lucky ones. Some people waited in line for 5. And this is what I kept hearing. I didn't ask people who they were voting for, although I was very curious. But what I kept hearing from everybody in the line is, we just want this to be over. We just want it to be over. So, but you do have an increase in younger voters. You have an increase in black voters, Latino voters, women voters, black voters in particular. Shaquille O'Neal, who is 48, just announced for the first time a couple weeks ago that he's voting for the very first time, and he's 48 because he believes that there is so much at stake. But this is, you keep hearing that messaging on both sides. There's so much at stake. So they're deeply divided, and people are very worried and very afraid. However this turns out, people on both sides are very afraid.
Yeah, and we'll talk about all of this on Tuesday. But Ed, I mean, some of this comes down to just basic math at this point. And we know there's been so much time on the trail. Nora just detailed some of it. Both candidates are spending a lot of time in the Midwest, really trying to win those supporters in the heartland. For Joe Biden, he's got to bring them back to the Democratic Party.
He does, which is why you saw so much focus this weekend by him personally on Michigan, yesterday campaigning with former President Obama. For the first time this entire cycle, they brought out Stevie Wonder in Detroit. Today, he gives a speech in Philadelphia, makes another stop in that area. That's an important part of that battleground where they need to run up the numbers compared to 4 years ago. Him, his running mate Kamala Harris, Dr. Biden, Doug Emhoff, all campaign across Pennsylvania tomorrow. For so long, they called him the third senator of Pennsylvania. He's emotionally invested in winning that one back, especially. They're feeling pretty good about Michigan. But look also at the fact that supporting characters like the former president, Barack Obama, is headed to Georgia tomorrow, not only to campaign for Biden, but for the two Democratic Senate candidates that are on the ballot. They believe there's a chance that at least one of them could get beyond 50% and win that seat. You're seeing a conversation about unity, a focus on figuring out the pandemic from the Biden side, versus literally, he says it, but it's true, make America great again, again. In not only the messaging, but also the strategy. Go everywhere, hold these big rallies, turn out your supporters on election day and make it happen. We'll see who ultimately figured it out.
And that's the thing, John. I feel all of us are kind of holding our breath. No one wants to say which way this can break, because President Trump has made his political career around defying the odds. Can he do that again?
Well, let's step back and think about what the odds are here for an incumbent president. Usually, if you're not at a 50% approval rating, you are in real danger. He's not at a 50% approval rate. He's also president overseeing a pandemic that's killed 230,000 Americans, where the numbers are spiking, and they are spiking in the key battleground states where he needs his voters to turn out. He is in open conflict with his health officials about what to do. And he is blamed by the majority of voters for not handling the pandemic, which is the #1 issue most polls show for Americans. So if the president is reelected, the rabbit he will have pulled out of the hat is the old line about the buck stops here. Americans will have said, the majority of us think he's done a bad job, 4 more years for him. That's an extraordinary thing if the president is reelected. And if he does it, it will be the greatest death-defying act he has done. How will he do it? By doing well in the rural areas, by doing well with non-college white voters. This is his base. And by limiting his bleeding among suburban women. He's been losing those voters since he was elected. He has to make that loss smaller. But if the president wins, it will be an extraordinary political act.
And it'll be the final, in some ways, transformation of the Republican Party to the party of Trump, will it not?
If you look at the various states, if you go and talk to the Republicans in various battleground states, it is already Donald Trump's party. And you know that not only because he's put his thumbprint on the party, you know it because of the incentives for those who would like to rise in the party. What's the threshold question for anybody who wants to be a future success in the Republican Party? Are you with Donald Trump or are you against him? If you're not with him, you have no future right now in the Republican Party.
And we've seen that trying to be sometimes in both places, Ed, with some of the Senate candidates.
We have. And you could go to Iowa, for example, where a poll overnight shows that Joni Ernst is actually in the lead after weeks of polling that suggested that her Democratic opponent, Teresa Greenfield, had pulled ahead.
That Iowa poll suggests, in fact, that the shy Trump voter is emerging.
Right.
That independents are going back towards Donald Trump. That actually some women are returning to the Republican fold who were there in 2016 and may have not been able to say it publicly in a poll or to their friends that has come back. Now, look, Joe Biden can win without Iowa. There's no doubt about that. But it's a question about
maybe sending a message, though.
Right, about maybe about other
message.
places. And that's why that's this, is that a canary in a coal mine or is it an outlier?
And 2 other women, though, on the Senate ballot that we should watch Tuesday night, Susan Collins in Maine, Martha McSally in Arizona. Both have struggled with how much to embrace the president and how much to get as far away from him as possible.
Wasn't Martha McSally really trying to distance herself from him? And he said,
She
"Come on
was,
up
and
here,
then she's had to
yeah."
show up at a few of his
Yeah.
rallies. The president's been reluctant to cede airtime to her in part because she wasn't loyal enough, in his view.
There were a few bear hugs that preceded the pullback.
Yes.
Yes.
And that is the challenge that so many Republicans in these tricky races across the country have had to deal with.
And the reason that's important is this is about this election, but it's also about future elections and whether the party of Donald Trump can win not only in states that are more like the America of old, but in states that are growing, becoming more educated, more diverse. And that's why Arizona will be so interesting, is if Donald Trump is able to win in that arena, it suggests that he can compete in places with a much more dynamic electorate. If he loses and there are 2 Democratic senators from Arizona, that will mean a longtime Republican state is now turning blue.
And yeah, that was one of the things that was interesting in talking to Ronna McDaniel, the head of the Republican Party. She focuses a lot on policy in her messaging and policy to reach suburban women. But what she talks about is not what the president is talking about on the campaign trail when he says he's trying to appeal to suburban voters.
He seems to be sending dog whistles to suburban voters. You know, vote for me because I'm keeping your neighborhood safe. And then the question that many people are asking is keeping them safe from what? It'll be interesting to me to see what happens in Arizona after the big endorsement from Cindy McCain. Will that make a difference? She was on our show on CBS this morning and said, I'm asking women to step over the line with me and join me. She's a longtime Biden friend, but she's also a very well-known Republican. So for her to take that step, I think sent a message. We'll see if people follow her.
Nora, we just talked about this with Jay Johnson, the former Homeland Security Secretary, but there is so much scrutiny on this election because of what happened in 2016 and concerns about foreign influence. I know you focused on this for 60 Minutes.
Well, the former head of the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, spoke with us exclusively. He's never done a television interview before. He's called this the Super Bowl of all elections. Why? Because of foreign interference. Russia, Iran, and China. It is the big X factor coming on Tuesday night. They want to sow chaos. They want to scare us. Yet we have the most powerful government in the world. We have incredible people that are working to thwart those attacks. The nightmare scenario is some sort of cyber attack on Election Day in one of these key counties. But we are told, don't worry about that. They're on track for it. And then the other X factor is that some sort of violence rings out. And I think that's something we'll be watching.
We'll be watching that and bring you the latest. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. We will all see you on Tuesday. And if you have not voted yet, it's not too late. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.